Well, it's great to have everybody back, and I'm really grateful to do this video. It was an experience that the title of this video, just to start off with, sorry, I'm all over the place, is it's a prophetic video on future times in the United States. What are some things that we're going to see in the future about this country? And I went to a prophetic conference, which is like the first time I really went to anything like this. And it was with Jeremiah Johnson. It was like very recently. And what they did, they call it, I forget, like prophetic activation. So it's essentially, it's like our impartations. And it's teaching prophetic people how to do impartations, which is a bunch of, fancy words. Basically giving people prophetic words on, people that you meet. If you are prophetic, if you have some kind of gifting in that way, which the whole room was pretty much full of people like that. And at one point I paired up with this other guy, and what we had spoken of to each other was very, very accurate of according to what was in each other's lives. And when they first told you're going to pair up with somebody and you're going to tell them all about their life, I was like, that's not how God works in me normally. And I said maybe I'll get back to you on it tomorrow or the next day, but he usually tells me like a couple days later or the next day. So I was very doubtful it was going to work. But after we went through it, I was like, wow, it happened pretty much instantly. And the reason I'm sharing all this is because it was really a prophecy towards the country. And there was something very specific towards the person I spoke to doing it. But I wanted to just share this with you because it was very, to me, I realized this is for this country, really. So, and what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to talk to the person just a very little bit, or maybe you don't even have to. And I pretty much looked at the person, and they say, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? And so I pictured a ranch. I pictured this person on a ranch. And and then the whole point is they keep asking you questions to clarify what that meant, or if they had a question about what you saw or what God put in your spirit, then you go and you clarify what that was. So I told them I saw a ranch. I picture you on a ranch. And then they asked further questions. And the next thing I saw visually was a cow. And he asked another question. Right after that, I saw what was a blade of grass, or it looked like, I would say it's either like a straw, like a piece of long grass, or it's a strain of wheat, just a single thing of wheat. And these were very random, so I didn't know what the meaning of them was, so I just kept on going with it. And then I told him what I felt very strongly in my spirit is I said, you have to make a decision on something. There's something you have to make a decision on. And he told me that there was two things. One of the things he was working on was something that was very artistic. It was like you have to put a lot of time into it, and it was a very artistic thing. And I didn't know what at all this meant or anything. And then the second thing he talked about, he says, I want to do tiny houses. And I still didn't know what the meaning of the vision was, or the visions were. And then he asked me, what else do you see? And then God showed me the symbol, and I'm going to show you exactly what the symbol was. When at this moment, and I didn't even understand the vision, but at first the symbol was kind of like on its side, and then it got rotated, so I was right above the symbol. And what I realized is that when he told me about tiny houses, I started realizing that this symbol I'm showing you now, was an actual intersection, it looked like an intersection of roads, 3 roads coming into one. And there was a center area there. And what I interpreted as was that it was 3 roads that led to one, and this is like a center little area there of the 3 roads coming together. And then what God basically put into my spirit was that there's going to be tiny houses. Like you look at the circle there, and this little area is actually, this is where it's a little community, a little area where there's a bunch of tiny houses that are placed around the circle. And then he asked another question, or what does that mean, or something like that. And then God basically took me out. Like basically I the focus changed, and I was zooming way, 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 way out. And this little circle, this circle that you see, turned into what is now, what you're seeing is like, almost like you're at a Christmas, those little Christmas, like, lights, where there's like millions of lights at some Christmas display, and you see all these tiny little LED lights, and they're all white, and you see just huge amounts of these things. So as he zoomed out, that's all I saw was like thousands, or maybe up to 100,000. Like, there were so many, I couldn't even count them anymore, because these little communities, these little groups of tiny homes were like all over the country. Basically, there's so many of them, you couldn't count them. There were so many of them. And so then I realized, I was like, wow, this is what I didn't know, if he was going to be building tiny homes and part of a group of people that are basically building these tiny homes for people, which could be. But to me, it more felt like this is what the country's going to look like, where there are going to be so many of these tiny homes. And the one thing I realized in all of this, and I've always felt this in America, is that community is lost in this country. Basically what we do typically is we get, we're at home, we get in our metal box, our car, and then we drive to work, we see a few people, then we might go to the store, we might go to the movies, another place where there's just a few people, and then we go back home, we watch Netflix and go to bed, and then we do that for almost the whole week, and then we might go to the beach on the weekend, or might see something on the weekend or whatever, and see some other people. But there's very little interactions, and there's really a very little sense of community. And I've gone to Africa, I've traveled a lot in the world, but I've specifically gone to Africa and places like the Philippines that have Christian countries, that are still believing Christian countries. And there's community. Like, there's a lot of places, there's people all around you. And you can just say hello, you buy food at an outdoor market, you see people walking on the road, whatever you're doing, you're around a lot of people. And there's a sense of community. And that's one thing that I think this country is going back to. And, so I think that's those are things that God's going to do. That he's basically going to reset in this country. And so what the whole point of the cow and the wheat was, I realized, I was like, wow, this is referring to Joseph's dream, where Joseph saw, before Pharaoh, he stood before Pharaoh and realized that there is going to be there's a time of plenty, and then there's going to be a time of lack, a time of, God's judgment, but also God, basically supplying the needs of the Israelites while they're living in Egypt with Joseph and his family. And so the Israelites get to be strengthened in number, they get to grow in huge numbers, and they prosper for a long period of time until a Pharaoh comes and doesn't realize who they are and starts using them as slaves. But it was a time of, later on, of prospering, but God had to basically put people through things until there was a time of prospering. So there was 7 years in the biblical account, there's 7 years of harvest, and then 7 years of lack. So I think what the whole point of the tiny homes were in the villages was that, today people build these very expensive homes. They have, we have cheap fuel. I mean, everything we're pretty, as Americans especially in the West, we're very self-indulgent. We don't really need a whole lot of stuff. Money is so plentiful. We can borrow money. We can do whatever. And so I think that what God is trying to say is that there'll become a time where these people want community again, but they won't have the funds. They won't have all the things necessary. So they'll have to live and build tiny homes in small communities. Get back to that, and there won't be quite the wealth, be distributed to much less degree, and it's going to be people having community again and living with much less as far as less as needs and things that they're trying to, they'll make something with a lot less. So tiny homes you can build for $10,000. Whereas now, if you build a house in the United States, it's $300,000, starting, that's pretty, $250,000 to $300,000. And then I thought about, I've been looking a lot at people I trust as far as prophetically. online. What could lead to these things? God has shown me in the past that there are going to be terror attacks in America. There are going to be a lot of this type of thing going on that really destabilizes the country. Is one of the ways that's what He's spoken to me personally of. And it seems like Bill Gates again has come out and said, okay, there's going to be a new pandemic. This one's going to be much worse. And any of these things can any of these things can happen, whether it be a financial crash, the fiat money becomes worthless and people have to go back to what they have in hard, physical assets in gold, silver, stuff like that. And so what Bill Gates said was that there's going to be this new pandemic, which is much worse. And we knew from the last one, all the training wheels were put on, so all the authoritarian control comes back. And the masks, the all that stuff that comes back, and we know we've been through that. And he said it's going to happen in the next 4 years. And Bill Gates predicted back in I forget what year it was, and with the TED Talks, that the vaccines are basically going to decrease population by 15% in the world, and that's exactly what he said. There was exactly what happened. And sometimes you wonder, why did God allow people like Bill Gates to live? Like, why didn't He take these people out? Tony Fauci, these other people that have done some very heinous things, and their allegiance is to people in the World Economic Forum and groups like that. And so I really believe that this stuff is a form. God is letting it happen for judgment. I really believe that. Like, He's separating people. So if you went along with it, if you're living a certain way and you don't hear God's voice, then you're going along with the destruction. And there was some other things that have happened the last couple of years. We've talked about, or people have talked a lot about EMP devices with North Korea, China, or Russia, that they could knock down our electrical grid. And people don't understand a couple things, is that in America, we're very tied to our electrical grid and very connected to our automated supply chains, meaning, we expect fuel to be cheap. We expect gas station to have fuel. We expect electricity to flow, and we're highly dependent upon that. So if it gets interrupted, it's going to cause mass, like say there's, for a month we have no electricity. I mean, people are going to die. I mean, it's just the way it is. And I don't want to be a downer, but there's a point why I'm saying this. And so I don't want you to be afraid, but I want you to understand that God, if you have a true relationship with Him, He's going to protect you. Just like many times in the Bible, the remnant He speaks about, if you have a close relationship with God, you're dealing with the sin in your life. You're being very close to God, and you're looking for things in your life to live righteously. You're living righteously, basically, and you have a true relationship. You hear His voice, right? He's going to help you so that you don't fall into these traps to end up dying, to end up doing something that you shouldn't have done because you weren't hearing Him. So that's what I'm saying about all this. But I want to share that these things are that can be coming soon, and there are things that can completely destabilize this country if you're not listening to what God's instruction is. These things can really take you out or really severely hinder your life. And so the next thing, that other things, this is one thing that God showed me. People have said that there's a lot of people, prophetic people that I tend to trust, have said that there's going to be an invading army in America. This could happen with a civil war. Let's say there's a civil war in America, or it could happen if our grid goes down, that we basically we can't defend ourselves, that other countries can come in and really come right on shore and just basically start attacking people, taking over. This has been done many times throughout history. The Mongols, there's so many examples of this, but the Greeks, all these invading armies come and they basically overwhelm the country. And so, they could basically take down a grid, and do things. Another thing that, give me an example of something. China has developed a thing to be able to cut the ship that can cut, or a sub that can cut transatlantic cables. You have no idea how much of our internet is tied to cables underneath the sea. And recently, a couple years ago, the Kursk was a Russian submarine. Apparently, they were trying to stop somebody from cutting a country. I don't know which country this was, but they were going to cut a cable. And a lot of the Soviet, or the Russians, I shouldn't say Soviets, but the Russians lost a lot of service members. These were people that were high-ranking members, like very high-ranking members in their military and some special ops people. And the sub basically sunk, and all these people died on board. But they were trying to protect some undersea cable, which is what the story, at least as far as they went. And it wasn't. It was like an act of. They were trying to save something. And so, again, the grids, they can go down at any moment, and there's been a lot of hacking as well of our electrical grid. That these things can go down, or some of it, or half of it, or a majority of it could go down at any time. And if it's a coordinated attack, and there's not much we can really do to stop it. So, and I say this again to not, and I had one last thing, is that there was somebody that prophesied something, and they basically said there will be Chinese ships. Now, they said it would be on the east coast of our shore, not on the west coast, which is what you would think. But when they had said this, I basically got a vision, and it was a confirming vision to me that there would be Chinese ships on our east coast with troops in them. Now, it didn't say anything more than that. It just said that that's where they're going to be, and they're going to be ready to invade the country. This is a vision I had regarding somebody's prophecy when they were speaking of it. It doesn't mean they actually invaded, but they were waiting there on our east coast shore, which is the Atlantic side, which would be, everything from Maine down to Florida. So I'm not saying 100% it's going to happen, but these things could happen. And this is, all these economic things could be a reason why, or whether it be war, civil war, whether it be financial struggles, why people would have tiny home communities. They would spend much less money for homes, and this sort of thing could survive. And as well as we could even have Christian communities, like people deciding, hey, I don't want all that money and everything. I want a connection within a Christian community. Maybe there's a healing group, or different groups that are, single moms could get together in a in a Christian community, in a tiny house community, or it could be a healing community, or it could be, whatever it is, groups that are growing crops in small communities, that are farming organically because of the poison food supply. So these are all things that can happen. But that's what God showed me. God showed me that there are going to be many, huge number of tiny home communities throughout the United States. So I just want you to, and if you don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, I pray that you do what it takes to basically get him in your heart, to basically start following him, to turn your life over so that you can hear his voice clearly. It's not a formula that you do as far as, I have to, don't get caught up in traditions, don't get caught up in perfection or any of these other things. It's just simply, God, come into my heart. Let me hear help me to deal with the sin in my life. Help me to hear you clearly. I want to be with you, Lord. And that's what you do. And then you hear whatever he says is what you do. Whether it has to agree with the word of God, but it also has to be him speaking to you about what needs to happen in your life. And he will protect you. He will guide you. The Holy Spirit will guide you. And I pray this for everybody that's listening to this video. And I hope this encourages you. I hope it gives you faith to know that God is always there, that whatever is going to happen, he's going to be there for you. So I want this to be encouraging. I want this to be, to know that these things are going to happen.